Good afternoon, and thank you all for following today's interesting and very timely debate on the EU response to the coronavirus crisis and the recovery plan, organized by the Workers Group, the European Economic and Social Committee, and a very, very warm welcome to our audience who's following us on Twitter and Facebook and the other social media channels of the committee. My name is Jorge Valero. I'm responsible for economy and jobs at Iratxe, the EU Media Network. Before we start, let me share with you that actually we are celebrating at Iratxe because we not only celebrated our 20th anniversary last November, but we also launched a new partner last weekend on the occasion of the Europe Day, Iratxe Italia, and actually for such a important moment, we published an interview with the Prime Minister Conte, the Italian Prime Minister Conte. Now, I will introduce you to our great panel that we have for this afternoon discussion, and I will start with introducing our host, the President of the Workers Group at the European Economic and Social Committee, Oliver Röpke. Then we also have with us the Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights, Nicolas Schmit, to hear the Parliament's voice also in this debate of the recovery plan. We have the President of the Socialist and Democrats Group in the Parliament, Iratxe García. Buenas tardes, Iratxe.
Buenas tardes.
And finally, the General Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation, Luca Visentini. So I will start, before I give the floor to Oliver, I will just remind briefly what are the rules of the game for this afternoon. I will give 5 minutes to each of our speakers for the introductory remarks, and I will be very, strict with the time management to ensure that we have more time for our discussion with the audience, for the questions from my side and also from their side. And also, let me say that if you wanna, for our panelists, if you want to intervene in the discussion, please just write a quick message on the chat in order to request the floor. And now I will give the floor to our host, to Oliver, to let's say set the tone for the discussion. Oliver, your 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Jorge. I hope you can hear me properly.
Very well.
Very well. Thank you very much for the introduction, and I would like to welcome also all the other participants and all the people who are joining this online debate. Thank you very much for this. And last but not least, I would like to thank my own colleagues from the EESC for organizing this debate. Yeah, how to start? I mean, it seems clear to me, I think to everyone, that this crisis, this pandemic crisis is an unprecedented crisis. And I think just recently, the economic forecast of the European Commission confirmed once again that this virus will have not only a major impact, but it's a major shock for global and also for EU economies. And therefore, of course, we can already see that this crisis has a major impact, a major social consequences for workers, for the lives of their families, for their salaries and for their income. So I think we all know that we will experience a recession of historic proportions this year. And as you know, we tried in all the member states, also as social partners, with short-time work schemes, with wage subsidies, and also with support for businesses and labor, we should try to limit the job losses and the impact of this crisis. But what we can see in some member states is already a massive wave of layoffs. And therefore, I think it's now really high time to discuss what are the next steps and how can be the joint and a powerful reply from the European level. And I think this is one of the aims of this debate in the afternoon. I think if you look back, it's not really fair to blame always the EU for being passive. I mean, certainly there was a delay in the reply, but I think it was at the beginning, it was the member states, actually. The member states who couldn't act jointly. Some member states closed the borders without any coordination. Others stopped the export of medical devices, medical supply to other countries. So really bad experiences. But I think now we can see that not one single member state can cope with this crisis. It's only Europe. We only together can cope with this crisis. And coming back to our committee, we as EESC, and you know that we characterize ourselves also as the voice of organized civil society. We are one of the smallest EU institutions, but we never stopped our work. We never stopped our work. Our voice was always there, and even on the urgent measures taken by the Commission and by the European Parliament, we delivered our opinions. And recently we set up also a dedicated subcommittee which will deal with the impact of the COVID-19 crisis. But furthermore, as workers' group in the Economic and Social Committee, we felt the necessity to contribute to this debate now, how Europe should react to this crisis. And that was the reason why our members, many members of our group, came together, worked together, and have devised a proposal for an effective recovery and reconstruction plan, but also for ideas towards a new economic and social model, which I hope we can achieve beyond the crisis. And just let me give some of the main points of this strategy. We will come back to details certainly later, but I think in the heart of this European reply, in the core of this European reply, must be the principles of solidarity, of sustainability, of workers' protection, and also workers' participation. And we elaborated some measures, short-time measures and medium-term measures as a proposal from the workers' group. I'm sure we have already published our plan, and you can see that we elaborated different stages how to reply to the crisis. And I think if we want to rebuild Europe, and we have to rebuild Europe after this crisis and during this crisis, we will only succeed when we can get all stakeholders on board, and especially social partners should be included in this process. You know that we are very much interested that the workers' voice is heard and social dialogue is protected and respected, because I think we can really contribute to this debate. Just 3 small points. I think we all agree that Europe needs as first and at an immediate stage a European economic recovery plan in order to kickstart the economy, to keep people in employment, in jobs, but also to safeguard the income of the people. I think this is the most important step we have to take now actually. But at the same time, we cannot stop our efforts for a fair and ecological transition and also digital transformation of our societies. And I will come back later to this, but I think we cannot afford that the social agenda will be on the side. I think the social agenda should be in the heart of any recovery and reconstruction plan for Europe. And when we talk about the necessary measures, then as workers' group, one of our, I would say, long-standing demands is to reform the fiscal framework, especially the Stability and Growth Pact. I mean, we welcome very much that the general escape clause was activated, but I think all those efforts show that the current framework of the Stability and Growth Pact is not really appropriate, and it should be reformed, including a golden rule, in order to give member states more fiscal capacity and more space for maneuver for more investments in infrastructure, in social infrastructure, in education, and in technological and as I said, social infrastructure. And maybe the last point, of course, we will discuss later, and we will see the proposals for a broad reconstruction plan, recovery plan. And I think we need a large financial power for this. So we estimated a volume between 1.5 and 2 trillion euros. And I think part of this has to be implemented already from the second half of 2020 through a special budget, but the rest must be embedded in a strong and powerful European budget, MFF 2021 to 2027. And maybe the very last point, because this is, of course, very controversial, but I think when we talk about solidarity, then it means solidarity also in financial instruments, which means we can't exclude anymore common European debt solutions. We can talk about the name, we can talk about how we frame them concretely, but I think without common debt solutions, if you call them recovery bonds or Euro bonds, there will be no way out of this crisis. So this is one of our main points also in our reconstruction plan for the future of Europe. I will stop here in order to give some points for discussion, and of course we can come back then to in the detailed discussion. Thank you, Jorge.
Very good, Oliver. And I hope you can hear me well now, because apparently there were some issues with my micro before. Yes? Okay, very good. So, yeah, as you said, Oliver, unfortunately, maybe for some of the panelists here, those Corona bonds or the joint issuance of debt is not very popular in your country. But precisely, I mean, you mentioned the recovery plan that it's very much expected, of course, and maybe the Commissioner Schmit, you can tell us more whether the social agenda that Oliver mentioned will be part of the recovery plan, and when we're going to see this recovery plan, because apparently there are some delays, and I don't know if this is related to some German concerns.
Should I go?
Yes, please.
Okay. Good afternoon. First, very pleased to participate into this round. So perhaps briefly, I would recall what has been done during the last weeks by the Commission, because many people say, when I listen to comments, well, what has Europe done? And there's the impression that Europe has not done enough. Especially when people talk about Europe, they include the member states and the Commission. So I would like to just recall what has been done from the outset. Well, as you said, the forecast has last week have given us the dimension, as Draghi said, the biblical dimension of this crisis. And not only an economic crisis, health crisis certainly, but also, and it's becoming a social crisis. So this is something we have really to have in mind. Now, what we have done at the beginning was first taking some measures on state aid, so allowing member states to support their companies, giving waivers for state aids, which is quite important in this period to help companies finally to survive. And the second, and it was already mentioned, that's the fiscal rules, the Stability and Growth Pact. So anyway, the Stability and Growth Pact is nearly 20 years old, 17 years old, I think. So even if we come back to a more normal economic situation, we need to reflect on these rules if they are adapted to the challenges of today and not the challenges and the problems and the circumstances of the time when this pact was adopted. Now, what have we done? We have first launched the famous coronavirus response investment initiative, amounting to 37 billion. This is mainly money coming from the cohesion funds, and we have given the member states not only this liquidity rapidly, but especially we have allowed this EU funding to be used much more flexible, in a more flexible way, in order to fight the causes of the corona crisis. Now, the second point, or one of major points we have adopted is this new instrument for temporary support to mitigate unemployment risks in an emergency called SURE. Well, we all know that there are about 30 million people now on short-time work in all, or nearly all the member states, because nearly all the member states have now introduced this kind of schemes. And if we hadn't this system, well, we would just go through situation as we see in the US. 30 million, 35 million people just having lost their jobs within 2 or 3 weeks. So this is a very important instrument because we support the short-time work schemes by loans with an amount of 100 billion euros. And I hope absolutely that this system will be definitely adopted, and it looks like, and that we can start with this system beginning of June 2020. So I urge finally member states to really adopt it and then also start putting it, really implementing it. But all that is fine, was a beginning, but it's not enough, because we have to have a plan which is commensurate to the magnitude of the crisis. And as you have said, the crisis is enormous. And especially we ask, and I have asked very clearly also, I have sent a letter to the President of the Commission and to my colleagues that this recovery plan has to absolutely include a strong social dimension. Because Europe cannot afford, after the last crisis, where really we were in a social crisis due also to austerity policy and so on, we cannot accept that this crisis will end up with a new social crisis. Therefore, the social dimension of the recovery strategy is very important. Now, social dialogue, you have mentioned it, is key. We try as a Commission to practice it. We had several exchanges with social partners. I think we have one this week. We invited the social partners to the last EBSCO meeting. Well, I will very rapidly mention what the ECOFIN or Eurogroup has adopted. Okay, there's an amount of 540 billion euros, which is mentioned with the SURE, which I already referred to, ESM, but we all know that ESM is looked very critical with 200 billion EIB, a European guarantee by the EIB, all that to give some liquidity to the economy, and especially also to small and medium-sized companies. So the objective is to protect jobs, income, and human capital, and which is important for the recovery, because we just do not want to recovery on the same basis. We want to make our economies more greener, more resilient, and fairer. So more social justice. And that's why the idea is to reinforce the MFF. This is the idea of increasing it, nearly doubling it up to 2% of GDP. We will see, and to create a recovery fund with sufficient resources in order really to support a European-wide recovery. I insist very much, because we are threatened by a social crisis, that the European Social Fund, and especially European Social Fund Plus, has to get its resources increased. So, especially in comparison to what was proposed in the initial proposal. So this is for me extremely important, and also I take on board what the Parliament has proposed on different issues like child guarantee, like also youth fighting youth unemployment, because one of the big challenges we will have to face is youth unemployment. So one generation will go within 7-8 years through a new unemployment crisis. And here we will present in the forthcoming weeks a new youth guarantee, which is fine, but I insist very much if this youth guarantee needs also more resources. Resources were capped. Now we are in a different scenario. We have to increase the resources for this youth guarantee. Now, I will not insist on the importance of occupational safety and health strategy. This is very important. I was in contact, especially with different sectors, be it the automotive sector or all the workers in agriculture. We have a new crisis, by the way, in some member states, especially in Germany, for the seasonal workers. So a health crisis. So this is something we really have to deal with. Now, wages, I just mentioned that we will go on with the minimum wage. I expect also your opinion on that. I think you announced it for September. We will start the second consultation round with social partners beginning of June. So I have mentioned child guarantee, very important. Poverty will be a big issue because we see already today hundreds of thousands of people depend on food banks. They have lost their job, they have lost their income, and the only place they can go are food banks. And this takes place in France, takes place in Germany, in Paris, in Berlin, in many places in Europe. So we have to help these food banks through the FEAD instrument, really to support people during this very harsh crisis. And by the way, we have to reflect on some system of minimum income. The Germans have announced that they would like really to deal with that during their presidency, and I'm really happy about that we can discuss about the minimum income. Homelessness is another issue. Parliament had organized an important debate on homelessness. We see that more people, because a lot of people will lose their homes, cannot afford anymore the rents. So we have really to tackle this issue. Now to conclude, first, the recovery plan has to be, is of utmost importance to take Europe out of this crisis, but take it out without dividing it. And because if this recovery plan has not sufficient size and it's not organized in time, we will have a big risk of growing divergences in Europe, not only on the single market, but also in the Eurozone. And when we talk about the Eurozone, we know what that means. We could shift very rapidly into a new Euro crisis or financial crisis, which really we have to avoid. So we have to work through this recovery plan on economic convergence, on social convergence, and this is my last word, very important, we have to include absolutely in this recovery plan our two major objectives. And Oliver has already mentioned it. That's the Green Deal and the digital. And when I say the Green Deal, if we do not have an important recovery plan with the sufficient size and also supporting those countries which have been hit most, those countries will not be able to do the necessary investments for the Green Deal. And by that, we increase again the gaps between some member states and others, especially also in the transformation, in the green transformation and the digital transformation, which would then again be a factor of division in Europe, which is really something we have to avoid. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. A lot of material there for the discussion afterwards. But before I give the floor to Iratxe, just a very quick question related to what you said. As I asked you before your comments, when are we gonna see this proposal for the recovery plan? Are we gonna see next week? And if you can tell us what's going on there in the college. I mean, why it seems that there is some sort of disagreements inside the college or the commission.
We are working on it. So now it's not yet sure if we can do it next week or the week after. It's not a question of a few days now. I think there are a lot of discussions going on. There are discussions also with the European Parliament, very important, because we need the support of the European Parliament. But it's not a question of 1 week or 2. It has to be consistent. It has to be ambitious. It has to be socially fair. So these are the conditions. And that's what at least colleagues of our family in the college want this recovery plan to be.
Very good. So now, Iratxe, maybe you can give us the Parliament's perspective and the socialist perspective for the recovery plan and also for the exit from this deep recession.
Thank you, Jorge, and thank you very much, Oliver, for this invitation. It's very important topic, and I am very glad to discuss today together with Nicolas and Luca. We are living special and difficult days. We have just celebrated 70 years of the Schuman Declaration, and we need to be creative and brave again if we want 70 more years of the European Union. In the next days, the European Commission will present its plans to get out of this crisis. And we all know that the recovery plan will be the most important legislative package in the recent history of the European Union. Our political family has a crucial role to play to make sure it is the right plan. I am very happy to notice that the S&D Group, the European trade unions, and the group representing workers in the committee share the same point of view, and we are also share our present similar proposals in our different action plans. The situation is dramatic. We can be sure that we need a radical change, and the change has to focus on 3 concepts: solidarity, convergence, and sustainability. The European Union cannot be just the sum of the national response. We need integrate solution based on solidarity. However, this is not only about solidarity. It's about the sustainability of the single market of the Eurozone. It is about our collective future. We should have the courage to explain that the response based on national solution will only increase the gap between the countries, regions, and persons. Countries have different economic capacities, so different response at national level could destroy the single market. And we have a lot of that who can guarantee that. The European response so far was positive, but it's not enough. The emergency package put forward by the Commission and then endorsed by the Council was a good first step. Together with the suspension of the fiscal rules, it gave the necessary fiscal room at national level to make it possible for member states to fight the health, social, and economic consequences of COVID-19. The next urgent step is to ensure that all 3 institutions, together with our social partners, agree on an ambitious and comprehensive economic, social, and ecological recovery plan. We need to avoid the mistake of the 2008 crisis. This time we have to be strong, mutualized instruments. We are under systemic shock with the asymmetric effects between the countries. And the recovery plan needs to put workers and people at the core of the recovery. We have to ensure a solid economic, social, and ecological recovery with a just transition, insist of creation division between North and South. We need to bridge these differences. We will not accept the return to irrational austerity. The recovery should be based on the European Green Deal, on the European pillar of social rights, and the Sustainable Development Goals. This is why we need a comprehensive package that brings together a more ambitious MFF, an ambitious Commission work program. The 2018 MFF proposal from the Commission was already too small before the COVID-19 crisis. However, the MFF will be not enough. We want a recovery fund of at least 1.5 trillion euros additional to the MFF based on fresh money. This fund must be guaranteed between MFF and own resources ceiling. This is why it will also be subject to the democratic control of the Parliament and the Council. The financial of the fund should be based on recovery bonds. I agree with Oliver when he explained us that if the problem is the word, we will change the word, but we need to guarantee the instrument, no? And we can call recovery bonds, or we can call in the other issue, no? But we need to guarantee the instrument. We have to protect jobs and workers' rights. It was never so important to guarantee social dialogue, collective bargaining, and workers' participation. This crisis cannot be an excuse to delay important proposals that our political family managed to include in the work program of this commission. For this, we can and will support Nicolas Schmit. We are cooperating very near with him to guarantee that in the commission program will be included in the calendar our priorities in the social dimension. We need a comprehensive anti-poverty strategy that focuses on the most vulnerable people. We cannot delay the implementation of the child guarantee, and sure cannot replace the unemployment reinsurance benefit scheme. The only conditionality should be the respect of the rule of law, because we speak a lot about the ESM and about the conditionality, and we need to understand that in this moment the only conditionality can be the respect of the rule of law. There cannot be effective, successful, and sustainable recovery without strong democratic systems with transparent and accountable public institutions at its core. When discussing the MFF, we need to have a real managed EU mechanism on democracy, the rule of law, and fundamental rights. It should be included in the possibility to suspend payments from the EU budget. This is the only kind of conditionality that the European institutions should be working on. And lastly, we need European Health Union. During the last week, we present a letter about this idea, and maybe we need to learn a lot of lessons in this crisis. And one is that we need a strong system health policy, and to have this European Health Union to guarantee that everybody in Europe will have access to the public health is very important for us. And I will stop now, and of course I hope that after we can debate between us about these important topics. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Iratxe. We always know, we know the role that the Parliament plays in the MFF negotiations, and how sensitive the Parliament is always when it comes to these talks. And the MFF process was already quite late. And we, in this context of the pandemic, as Oliver mentioned, and even Italy and other member states, we're talking about the need of some bridge financing. So how would you, let's say, how can we put these two things together? Because maybe if the Parliament plays hardball, we will delay even further the MFF adoption. So how you are going to be cooperative and at the same time play your role as, let's say, feeding into that discussion?
Yes, we are insisting a lot about it, because of course the instrument to implement this recovery plan have to be inside the MFF, but we know that if we have agreement in the MFF, the new MFF will start in January, and we cannot wait more than 6 months to have a strong solidarity and recovery fund. For that, we are insisting to the European Commission that it's necessary to find a solution to guarantee that in June we can start with this recovery fund to include different ideas, because as I try to explain you, this crisis is asymmetric, and a lot of countries will need the urgent support in this moment. We cannot wait more. We can believe that the situation have to understand in the member state that is more necessary than ever to have an agreement in the MFF, but have to be an ambitious MFF. We cannot accept to cut important policies for us. And for that, during this plenary, during this week, we will have a plenary session, and we are working in a common resolution to insist in this MFF. And of course, the Council needs to know that we are part of this discussion, and we have to be involved. And our priorities are very clear. We need an ambitious MFF, And at the same time, we need an ambitious recovery fund, and we have to do compatible both instruments.
Very good. Thank you very much, Iratxe. And Luca, now we go to you. We spoke a lot about workers' rights and the situation and the impact on the job market. As a trade union, what would you like to see in this recovery strategy? What are the essential elements for you?
Thank you very much, Jorge and Oliver, of course, for inviting me to this very interesting debate, also together with Nicolas and Iratxe. Well, let's make a step back. Let's see which is the situation in which we are, because the tools and the measures that have to be put in place, or that partially is being already put in place, have to be commiserated and targeted to the situation that the European labor market and economy are facing during the lockdown, and also now that we are gradually and slowly coming back to normality. It will take a long time, by the way, to get to normality. Our data tell us, also through our affiliates at the national level, that we are reaching, unfortunately, the number of 50 million workers that are in some kind of situation of unemployment. Of course, as Nicolas said, we have a more favorable situation than the United States, for instance, because only 1/3 of these 50 million people are actually facing permanent unemployment. They've really lost their jobs because the different measures that have been put in place have made sure that 2/3 of them can benefit from some kind of income support, short-time work arrangements, or other kind of employment support measures that have been deployed by the different member states. So in this respect, we have some hope that when we will get out from the lockdown, there is a real possibility, to come back to a normal economic recovery, although it will take a long time. Nevertheless, there are still relevant problems when it comes to the emergency measures, because Nicolas rightly pointed out that the European Union has done a lot. The European Central Bank, €750 billion have been mobilized. On the other side, the European Commission, after the decision in the Eurogroup, is also ready to mobilize more than €500 billion for the emergency measures, for healthcare systems, for companies, and for workers through SURE. But there are relevant obstacles in deploying these measures, and the obstacles are not at the European level, are not in the European Commission or in the European institutions. The obstacles, unfortunately, are in the member states. They are due to excessive bureaucracy of the structures of the different states on the one side, and on the other side also to the resistance of the banking system that is still slowing down, and in some cases even blocking the possibility for the money that is being earmarked by the central bank and by the European Commission to be really delivered to people, to companies, to the real economy, to workers in the labor market. Why I say that? Because, for instance, the large part of the 750 billion euros mobilized by the European Central Bank are staying blocked into the banks at the national level. They are not going to the companies. The level of credit has not escalated as it was supposed to be after the European Central Bank decided to confirm the quantitative easing measures that they have deployed. So there is still a problem in the banking sector that is not helping the economy, is not helping citizens, is not granting credits to the people to try to overcome this crisis. And the same problem, unfortunately, happens also for the emergency measures, because, the ESM, the European Central Bank, and SURE, the three tools that have been agreed, well, they are not agreed by Council yet. The regulations and the practicalities that should be adopted by the Council, well, they are not adopted yet. So this means that it will take still weeks, if not even months, probably in the case of SURE, for this money to reach the people that are most in need, to reach the companies and also the healthcare systems that are most in need at the national level. So I would really like to say that the European Union has done a lot to try to face the problems properly, but again, is the member states that are blocking even their own possibility to get access to the measures that have been deployed by the European Union. So there is still something not working properly in this European Union, if even when we are able in a very short time to take decisions about massive financial solidarity, then the member states are not able or not willing to use this money in a proper way, because there are still divisions, there are still blockages, there are still obstacles. And additionally, there is also another problem, that not all the citizens are treated equally in this respect. Because if you take, for instance, the short-time work arrangements of the income compensation systems that have been implemented at the national level, well, they grant some benefits to traditional workers in most of the sectors. But when it comes to small and medium enterprises, when it comes to platform workers, precarious workers, atypical workers, seasonal workers, migrants, well, all these people are very often completely excluded from the measures that have been deployed at the national level. So that's to say that it has been done a lot by the European institutions, also with the cooperation, of course, of the social partners and other stakeholders, but there is still a blockage, and we have still to make the pressure high to make sure that all these measures can be deployed properly. The second element, of course, is what we have been discussing about so far in this debate, and is what kind of recovery measures should be then already designed now in a way that when we will be back to normality and the economy will start back working, we can really avoid massive recession and massive unemployment. Many things have been already said. I would like to emphasize only a few of them. The first one is what Nicolas said, that the size of the recovery plan is not indifferent, because having 1 trillion additional on the top of the European MFF is one thing. Having less than this will mean that the impact of this recovery plan will be not enough. So it's really important that the size is kept, that the ambition that has been announced by Ursula von der Leyen, 2% of the European GDP, is really respected. We need really to see this money being earmarked and deployed by the European Union and by the member states. It's really important that this money is granted to member states through direct financing. We cannot have 1 trillion euros in loans, because this will only escalate the public debt of the different countries and will not make feasible any possible recovery in a proper way. So the mix that Ursula von der Leyen and also Charles Michel have announced between grants and loans have to be a fair mix. That means that the grants have to be more than the loans. Otherwise, we cannot cope with this emergency. And it's also very important, someone has already said that the path for the review of the European economic governance that Commissioner Gentiloni had launched before the lockdown, that this review is kept on track. It will be very, very problematic if we stop reforming our economic governance. The economic governance has shown that with the current rules doesn't work, is not able to cope with the emergency. So it's very important that this review is continued. Also because, you know, we see some two bad temptations flying around in the current debate in Europe and also in many member states. The first temptation is coming from some governments, that is to say, you know, okay, for now we have to relax the rules, but then when all this is gone, we have to come back to austerity. We have to come back to strict rules, strict financial rules, strict budgetary rules. We cannot continue with hazard policies, etc., etc. This will be a disaster. If this kind of approach will win in the medium term, it will be a disaster for any possibility for having a proper recovery. But there is also another temptation that is aligning a lot and is spread a lot around, especially among businesses and employers and the financial sector. That is to say, okay, fine, you know, the European Commission launched a very ambitious strategy before the lockdown that was the Green Deal, the European Pillar of Social Rights, some important reforms for social convergence, digitalization, etc. But now we have to come back to the essential. This is a refrain, a slogan that many employers and employers associations are repeating all the time. Coming back to essential. That translated into common language means let's have rid of the Green Deal, let's have rid of just transition, don't think about the social pillar, the SDGs and all this. We have simply to come back to business as usual. And we have to be back to the core of the kind of export-led and cheap labor-based economy that we have implemented so far during the austerity period. Well, these two, having again austerity and on the other side having being back to business as usual will be the biggest mistakes we could make to address the recovery phase that is going to follow. That's why solidarity is really crucial. Iratxe said very well that, the name of these bonds counts very little. What is really crucial is the effectiveness of putting together the future debt in a way that the European Union can really cope with a proper recovery strategy. But it's also very important, as I said, that we confirm some relevant and ambitious initiatives that the European Commission had scheduled before we enter the crisis.
We will have Luca, some opportunity to go more into detail on some of these proposals, including, for example, precisely what you mentioned, the risk of an excess of austerity when we exit the bigger stimulus, because the risk, of course, is that we could provoke a self-inflicted recession as it happened during the previous crisis, when we have this Eurozone crisis in 2012, precisely because we exit from that recovery plan too fast and maybe too aggressively. But maybe now I'm going to pass now to the debate, to the questions, and I'm going to start reading you some of the questions that have been sent by the audience via Twitter and also via Facebook. And for example, Beata Krude is asking you if there is still a place for a well-being economy in the period of the recovery and post-pandemic future. For example, you, Commissioner Schmit, you mentioned that there has to be some reflection on some system of minimum income. So maybe we can start with you, Commissioner. What do you mean with this minimum income that will come on top of the minimum wage proposal, and what appetite do you see for such an initiative that, for example, is being now putting forward in Spain as Iratxe as well?
Well, I think we see what Luca also mentioned. We have millions of people who have no income or very limited income in many member states. And this is really a dramatic situation from a social point of view, but also in a way from an economic point of view. And therefore, I think we have to make sure that every person gets a minimum income in a phase where he can or she cannot work or unable to work and is in a difficult situation. And therefore, we have to create a framework in Europe where certainly with an amount depending on the level of cost of living in the different member states, every citizen who has no other income get this minimum income. So this is a discussion we have to start now. As I said, the presidency wants to put that on their agenda. They even intend to have council conclusions on that. So I am ready to listen to this discussion and try, if this is the wish, to have a proposal on such a framework on minimum income. I make a clear difference between framework for minimum wage and the framework for minimum income. These are two separate issues, although there are links between one and the other, but they are two separate issues. But I think we cannot just accept that people in our societies are just nowhere. And therefore, I think we need this European framework for minimum income.
Very good. Oliver, I think you wanted to comment as well.
Yeah, just to support what now Nicolas has said, but also before already Iratxe and Luca. I think we risk a bit at the moment that social issues and social rights, workers' rights, could be pushed aside as second-class issues. And I think we really have to resist. We have to insist that the principles of the European Pillar of Social Rights will remain not only our compass, but also, I would say, a commitment for all of us. And I'm really happy and grateful for the comments of Nicolas Schmit, who's definitely committed to this European Pillar of Social Rights, despite some attempts to delay or to postpone certain initiatives. I think this would be really dangerous. This would be really dangerous because it's not a second-class issue. I think, especially during the crisis, if we have to fight poverty, for example, if we have to fight for decent wages in all the countries, I think those initiatives are more important than ever. And I'm also very much in favor to pick up an initiative on European minimum income, whereas I'm fully aware that we should separate the question of minimum income from the question of minimum wages. And as it was already mentioned, we will deliver also as Economic and Social Committee. We were asked for an opinion and we will deliver our opinion in September. And I hope it will be in a broad consensus, an opinion in a broad consensus. Just one additional remark on the question of SURE, because I think SURE, this instrument which was proposed very quickly, I would say, by the Commission. From my point of view, it's an important instrument. It's an important instrument because of course it gives it's a financial instrument to mitigate the impact of the crisis on the labor markets, on the workers. But it's also a proposal and an example for an instrument of solidarity, because I think the volume of 1 billion euros of this SURE instrument is actually backed by guarantees by the member states. So it is an instrument of solidarity. It's a good instrument, but I would like to see in the future that we have also some requirements which should be met by those initiatives. And it was mentioned, if you talk about an European unemployment reinsurance scheme, but also regarding SURE, I think we should come to guidelines how to apply this SURE instrument. And I think member states should benefit from this support only if they involve properly social partners, because social partners are the best partners being involved and to design those short-time work arrangements at national level. And in this respect, I would also like to mention that if we come later on to a proposal for a European unemployment reinsurance scheme, we should also discuss about minimum standards for the national unemployment insurance systems. We made already some proposals. I don't want to have one single European unemployment insurance, of course not. They are national insurances, but I think we need more upward convergence. So if we talk about net replacement rates, if we talk about the entitlement of workers for social benefits, I think we should speak about minimum standards at European level also for the unemployment insurances.
Very good. Luca, I think you also wanted to comment.
Yeah, no, just briefly about the minimum income. I fully agree with Nicolas and Oliver that minimum income and minimum wages initiatives should go together. This is really crucial, and it will be a big mistake to drop them. There are, pressures, to slide down or to eliminate these initiatives. It would be a big mistake because, as Nicolas said, we have two different categories of people here. There is a category of people that are those that work, that very often cannot benefit from a decent wage. So having a strong initiative at the European level on minimum wages, but also to strengthen collective bargaining, to start a real process for wage convergence is crucial. But at the same time, there are also categories of people that cannot work or simply if they work, very often they don't even reach the poverty threshold, so they are working pools. And you have also poor pensioners and people that are now outside the labor market that need really to have some support. So having these two elements, minimum wages and minimum income, going together in a strategy for recovery is fundamental. And we need also to do what Oliver just said, to put some social conditions and some standards, set some standards when it comes to the application of SURE, but also start already designing a permanent SURE for the future, something that can really help us in setting some permanent system for solidarity and support when it comes to how to address unemployment and how to preserve jobs. But I want also to mention other 2 points that are part of the European Commission agenda and cannot be dropped. One is the initiative on pay transparency. That is a fundamental tool to guarantee equality between women and men in the labor market and at the workplace, especially when it comes to equal pay. And the other element is that we need absolutely something binding that can really include non-standard workers, platform workers, self-employed, freelancers into the same rights and protection as for the other workers. Now, these categories of workers, we are talking about millions and millions of people, are excluded from everything. They don't have a decent income, they don't have any wage protection, they don't have access to collective bargaining, they don't have access to decent pension or social protection. This cannot continue like that. As Iratxe said, recovery must be based on the rule of law, but rule of law means also equality, non-discrimination, and the possibility for everybody to enjoy the same rights and the same protections. And at the moment, this is not happening in most of the labor markets of the European Union. So I would say these initiatives are really crucial if we want to build a fair and inclusive recovery for the future. Jorge, you are muted.
No, Iratxe, I think you wanted to comment as well.
Yes, I would like to say something about the minimal income because during the last weeks we were working inside our group with our action plan to fight against this crisis, and the social dimension for us is very, very important. And of course, we need to introduce the idea about the minimal income because it's very important to put the focus more on the people's well-being, no? And we need to understand that the fight against the poverty is essential, and we need to guarantee that everybody in Europe can have the same support, no? And not only for the countries who have more capacity to respond in this crisis. For that, it's very important, and we include in our S&D resolution the idea about the minimal income and, of course, the minimal wage that, as you know, we were working before this crisis, and it's in the Commission work program, and we are working very, very near to the Nicolas Schmit. And the other important question for us, Luca tells something about it, is the gender perspective, because in this crisis, the more vulnerable people are more affected in this crisis. And we need to understand that the gender perspective, it will be necessary because, for example, we are speaking a lot now about the telework, and we can see that a lot of women are working in their home, but at the same time, they need to attend their children, and we cannot think that it's in the second level. We need to understand that the gender perspective must be included. We are speaking about the same salary, but we have to speak about other important issues from the gender perspective. For example, like the issue about the gender-based violence. With this confinement, it's a very strong problem, and the different institutions need to support the women who can be victims. And we cannot forget that the social dimension, it's necessary to understand that the more vulnerable women need to be more support, no, by the European institution. And of course, we are working with our gender working group in the European Parliament and trying to present a good proposal about it.
Very good. I'm very happy because I have a very proactive both panel and audience. There are a lot of questions and all of you want to react to each of the questions. So what I will ask you is please to try to reply as short as possible, straight to the point as possible. And I will take, well, there are several questions related to the competencies that maybe the European Union should gain because of, I mean, in the aftermath of the crisis to, let's say, cope with future challenges in a more capable way. For example, gaining some health powers at EU level, or I don't know if, for example, you, Commissioner Schmit, could tell us whether this is an internal debate that is already happening in the Commission, and what other powers or competences would you consider that the EU should obtain?
Well, I think that there's a demand to create a health union. I think Iratxe has mentioned that. And we have seen that when you are facing a pandemic like the one we are in now, there are no borders. Even if we close the borders, the pandemic goes over the borders. So I think we have to have more means to manage this at the European level. This is, I think, very, very key, and therefore we have to work, because we all know that probably this will not be the only health crisis in the forthcoming decades. There is a risk that there will be other ones. So this is a real risk, and therefore we have really to get the tools and the competencies also. That's very important. Second, I think we have a debate on the future of Europe. And here we have to show that what is dealt better at the European level than on a national level. We see that in the social area, we need a strong social dimension, European social dimension, which does not mean that Europe has to decide on everything, but we need a strong social dimension. It's clear that unanimity is one of the blocking effects in the European Union. If in major issues we are always hurting unanimity, well, we are not able to act as we should. And it has been said, we have to act timely, urgently, because it's not a question of waiting 6 months or 9 months before taking a decision. We are in such a macroeconomic and social crisis that the decisions we have to take have to be taken rapidly, and they have to be sizable, and they have to be targeted. And doing that with unanimity is very difficult. I do not want to be pessimistic, but it's very difficult. So I think this is something we have to reflect on. What kind of functioning of the Union do we need to face this very big changes which are taking place now and which will accompany us during the next decades?
Very good. And there is also a lot of debate on the need to, for example, bring back to Europe some strategic sectors and industries. There is a lot of talk, for example, about medical equipment, pharmaceutical products. But how can we guarantee that when we bring back those investments, those industries, the social agenda is protected in order, because maybe there is some temptation for some companies to cut labor cost or maybe other standards in order to be, more cost effective by bringing those companies and production back to Europe. It's a question, for example, for you, for Luca, and for Oliver. How can we ensure that the social agenda and the social values are protected when we bring back those industries to Europe?
Maybe I can say some words about this. First of all, I think we all have experienced during this crisis that many parts of the production chains are now delocalized to other countries, to other continents. And we have seen that this can bring major problems. And we had a lack of industrial capacity in very, very important sectors, for example, in key medical equipment, but also in other sectors. And I think this shows that we have to support corporations which are able to relocate production capacity to Europe, because we have to regain again control after the production and ensuring autonomy in those crucial sectors. And therefore, I think a new European industrial strategy should protect those strategic sectors also from the markets, making sure that we have the capacity to produce those crucial products, and that we have still a strong industrial sector in Europe. And maybe this I could combine with another point, with another demand in our recovery and reconstruction plan. And this is, I would say, for beyond the crisis, this is the question or our model of a sustainable company, a company which involves workers and social partners. I think it's also a question of democracy at work. And I think we should make more efforts, even if we have achieved already a lot, but we should make more efforts to make sure that all the workers will benefit from participation rights, from information rights, from consultation rights. I think this is really key, especially if we talk about the Green Deal. I think there's no Green Deal, we all say this, without a social deal. But what does it mean? It means that the huge challenges, the transformation processes which are ahead of us, they can be managed only if we bring workers and entrepreneurs on board, both of them. So therefore, I think we should think about a new framework, a stronger framework, how to involve workers and how to strengthen workers' participation, from which all the workers across Europe can benefit. And then I hope we can make sure that this Green Deal will be also a social deal.
I think, Luca, you wanted to comment, but and also maybe you can tell us about successful stories of this workers' participation, because, for example, the country I know based in Spain, there are some groups, corporate groups, where the worker participation is very strong and the economic results have been also good. In other countries, in Germany, I think that it's also working well and there are some success stories. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about that as well.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's true what Oliver said, and also was asked by some questions from the public. I mean, this crisis has shown that our supply chains are not resilient, because the fact that they are so long and so spread abroad outside the European Union, I mean, made sure that the crisis has interrupted completely our supply chains. And so some products can simply be not delivered any longer, I mean, to the European Union, because the supply chains are interrupted. So there is a discussion going on, even among employers, among businessmen, about the fact that it's probably needed to shorten the supply chains, to bring back some productions to the European Union, and also to make our supply chains not only more resilient, but also a bit more sustainable. But, you know, we have to be very pragmatic in this respect. What is that incentivize the companies to delocalize their productions abroad? Is paying less taxes, paying lower salaries, and not having any boundaries, I mean, in terms of social protection, in terms of social dialogue, collective bargaining, and workers' participation. These are the elements, I mean, that make, I mean, more convenient for many businesses, I mean, to delocalize their activities outside the borders of the European Union, and sometimes also from an European country to another European country, because we don't have also to forget that there are a lot of divergences in terms of taxation, social contribution, salaries, etc., also within the European single market. And by the way, additionally, even worse is the fact that many multinational enterprises that are based, legally speaking, in some European countries where social dialogue, workers' participation, and collective bargaining are very high level, when they go abroad, they don't respect anything of this. On the contrary, they are behaving very often even worse than other companies from the countries where they go to invest. So I think that there are only two ways, I mean, to resolve this problem. The first point is that we need to introduce a level playing field in terms of wages. social protection and taxation within the European single market, first of all, because there is still too much dumping in terms of taxation, social protection, and wages. We have incredible divergences still existing in the European single market in this respect, and here it comes the need to reinforce the European competences. It's really high time for the European Union to have the power to impose minimum levels of taxation, especially for businesses. This is not yet the case, unfortunately. There are some European Commission proposals in this respect for a minimum corporate tax base and a minimum level of taxation for corporates. These elements are essential, as it is essential, of course, also to have wage convergence and social convergence within the European Union. But then the other point is how to disincentivize our companies from investing abroad, from moving productions and services outside the European Union. And we have to be very frank here. It's not about reintroducing trade tariffs, but it's about introducing trade protection mechanisms, because it's unacceptable that goods, services coming from outside the European Union are not sanctioned when these goods and services are produced without any respect for taxation, for social protection, for social dialogue, and for wages and working conditions of workers in those countries. So these two elements, I think, building a level playing field with increased competences for the European Union in the single market, and on the other side, introducing trade protection mechanisms that can really export this level playing field also abroad, are essential if we want to build a more sustainable economic model for the future, I think.
Very good, Luca. Thank you very much. Iratxe, I think you wanted to comment also on this, or the competences that Europe should...
Yes. Yes, because with the other issues, I was listening now, Luca, and I totally agree when he speaks about the fiscal policy, for example, in Europe. That is a very important debate in our institution, and we need to understand that it's essential, this debate, and to put on the table some ideas in this way, with the common fiscal policy to guarantee the more convergence. But the issue about the competence, because the 9th of May this year, as I tried to explain in the beginning of my speech, we celebrate the 70 years of the Schuman Declaration, and we had to start with the Conference of Future of Europe. It was not possible for the COVID crisis, but in any case, I think that can be an important instrument to open the debate with the citizen. It's very probably that this Conference of Future of Europe can start in autumn, in September or October, we will see. But in any case, for us, as a political family, it's very important to open the debate because Europe needs to reinforce our institutions, and we have to rethink a lot of issues, for example, about unanimity about our competence, because in the beginning of this crisis, a lot of citizens feel that Europe, we are not in the solution, but the question finally is the problem about the competence, because if the European Commission can only make guidelines or suggestions, or can propose general ideas, but have not the competence, is very difficult to strong and to put in a good way, And for that, it will be good moment to introduce this debate, for example, about a health union. How can we guarantee the access for the citizen to have a strong health service in all European Union and not only in some countries? It's very important debate, and we need to open to the stakeholders, trade unions, civil society, and this debate cannot do it only in the bubble Brussels. No, it's necessary to go to the different countries and listen what are thinking the people about Europe. Because for me, it's very frustration when we listen the citizen. No, the problem is Europe. No, we need to change Europe, and we need more Europe. But not only more Europe, we need better Europe. But to do that, it's necessary to open the debate and listen the citizens.
Very good. Commissioner, I wanted to come back to the recovery plan, because we discussed about the size. I mean, I think more or less all of you agree that it has to be around 1.5 trillion, and this is the figure already in the general debate when there is a bit of a consensus. Also, the policies. I mean, a strong focus on the Green Deal and on the digital transformation. But what about this debate of grant and loans, which seems that it will be the model of all the battles? And Luca, for example, mentioned that there has to be a fair balance, which is more or less also the expression that President von der Leyen used. So I don't know if you could give us a hint of what is being discussed in the college, in the commission, because I don't know if grants will be channeled through the MFF and loans through the recovery fund, or what is going on there?
Well, I think that's a fundamental, the way we cannot just, let's say it this way, you cannot just add debt to debt. So this is clear, and everybody is aware of that loans cannot be the only way, especially if we support those member states which have been hit most and who do not have the resources also to recover as rapidly. And this is a problem because we see now that the differences are huge. When I look at a country like Germany, what they have now invested and how they assist their companies and others. So there is a big difference in support. So we have to create, as I think Luca or Oliver said, a level playing field. Otherwise, we are running into trouble with the internal market. But the point is not about grant. The point is about European projects. That's what we have to focus on. Wherever these European projects are created. And this is the notion of solidarity. It's not a transfer from country A to country B. It's creating a common dynamic, positive dynamic. And here we have to find the right financial modalities. And loans cannot make up for everything. So how can we create European projects where we support those who need the money, and we are creating something positive for the overall recovery of Europe? Because those member states who, as Iratxe said, we have a symmetric crisis with unsymmetric consequences. But those who have been hit a bit less or who have more resources, if part of Europe does not manage to come out of this recession, and they are going into a long period of stagnation, well, it's not only these countries suffering from that. Whole Europe will suffer from that. So it's a common interest to lift everybody out of this terrible, if I may say so, mess. So this is something we have to approach and not focus grants, loans. No, we have a common European project, and we have to have the right financial solutions, modalities to finance this European projects in the framework of a broad global recovery plan. Because it's like Corona bonds. Now the word, if you use Corona bonds, you are shot in one part of Europe. So let's put that aside. But that we have to have a common financial instrument, nobody really can put that into question. This is absolutely indispensable. Call it recovery fund, call it whatever you want, but this is what we have to do. And that's what we are working on. Now, I cannot say more for the time being, but this is the philosophy, and not always antagonizing countries or parts of Europe. No, it's a common European project. And those, I always quote, not because if I take the Netherlands export 7 times more to Italy than they export to China. And nobody can expect to rely on China or on whatever other global partner to come out of this big recession, because the recession is also there. So really, we have to rely on Europe first We have to rely on our internal market. And this is only possible if we can all together come out of this recession. And that's why we have to invest all over Europe and support those who are more in trouble than others. So this, I think we have to change a bit the narrative and the view on how we approach the recovery.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I will read one question now that we received from our audience. How can we ensure that the economic recovery does not purely mean the recovery of multinational companies at the cost of workers and social security? It's a question from Facebook from Sofia Reiseker. So maybe, Luca, I think you had to go, so maybe briefly, so maybe you can start.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And sorry, but in a few minutes I have to leave. I'm really sorry for that. Well, I think that all the elements that we have just mentioned are exactly the reply to this question. So building a level playing field, making sure that the rule of law is respected, that we can have a proper convergence in terms of wages, in terms of taxation, in terms of social rights and social protection. Well, this is really the way to make our recovery sustainable, without mentioning, of course, the environment that has also to be part of this level playing field. If we will be able to put this kind of conditionalities, positive conditionalities, I would say, at the core of our recovery, then it will be clear that we will make sure that not only the multinational companies will benefit from that, but there will be a real inclusive economic model that we can build up together. I think this is the most important reply to this kind of concern, that is a real concern, because as I said earlier, there is a strong push to come back to business as usual. We have absolutely to avoid that.
I don't know, Iratxe, if you want to add something?
Yes, very quickly to say that, of course, we need, with this recovery plan, we need to guarantee the future of the multinational, of the enterprise, but we cannot do it if they are thinking to have less rights or lower salaries. No, this was the problem in the last crisis in 2008, and now we need to be attended in this question. Okay, we have to support the enterprise, but we have to guarantee the same rights and the same salaries. And in this way, we need to cooperate between us, between the European Commission, European Parliament, and of course the role of the trade union and the economic and social institution. Now, for that, we will be very attentive on that, and I hope that we can keep the cooperation between us to guarantee the same rights and same salaries.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner, if I'm not wrong, I think the Commission is working on, let's say, solvency instrument to support solvent companies, but maybe with member states whose public finances are not that strong to help those companies during this pandemic. So I don't know, I mean, if you could give us more details about this new pan-European instrument to support companies, and whether it will be also targeting, for example, SMEs and not only big companies or multinationals.
Yes, absolutely. I think I mentioned, in my presentation, especially the instrument which will be created by the European Investment Bank, about 200 billion, which will be focused for SMEs. So I think this is extremely important. We see that in many areas where we have, especially SMEs, they are in big trouble. So we are risking now losing tens of thousands of enterprises, SMEs. And with these SMEs, we are losing hundreds or millions of jobs. So I think it is very important now to act and to help SMEs to overcome this situation, and we have to give them the liquidities. This is done on national base, but we have also to put into place European means. As you said, not all the member states have the financial firepower, the financial capacity to help and support their SMEs as others do. So we have to recreate some kind of level playing field in that context. Two remarks, if you allow. First, resilience was mentioned by Luca. I want to say, well, we need a more resilient economy. And this means that we cannot have an economy where the priority number one for companies is the share value. This is not compatible with a resilient economy. And maximizing profitability and minimizing taxation. With that, you cannot have a resilient economy and a resilient society, by the way. Second, social pillar. For us, the social pillar remains absolutely central. And we are already working on an action plan for the social pillar. The Commission has not changed its working program on the social issues. This is absolutely important. I mentioned, by the way, child guarantee, I mentioned youth guarantee, I mentioned minimum wage, which was a bit controversial, but we will continue working on that. And we will have an action plan on the social pillar under the Portuguese presidency. We are working already on that to make very clear that this is also part of a resilient European economy. Without strong social dimension, you cannot have a resilient economy, and including also a high level of social investments, because we are discovering with this pandemic that in those countries where there have been not enough investments in social infrastructure, in health, for instance, or even in education, well, there are a lot of problems, or the problems are much bigger. So this is something we stick to, and we, together with Parliament, we will work on.
Very good. And before we finish, maybe a question of slightly different nature that we also got from our audience regarding the contact tracing apps, which will be so important for this deconfinement period. The question is, what role the social partners will play in designing and developing these contact tracing apps, maybe to ensure that, I don't know, workers' concerns or interests are taken into account, maybe considering the perspective of the workplace. Oliver, maybe you can respond.
Yes, I can say something about this. First of all, I have to say we will see how such an app will be designed, because at the moment we talk about such an app in the member states. But I think also we need a European solution. I mean, we call already on member states to open the borders again. I hope it will be done in the next time, as soon as possible. But then to have 27 national solutions for a tracing app looks a bit ridiculous to me. So I think we have to find a common solution. Those apps have to work together, or even better, we need a European solution, and a solution which definitely fully respects the data protection regulations. So this is clear, but I have strongly a preference for a European solution for this tracing app. Can I maybe add some words to the questions before, or
please go ahead?
Because I fully subscribe what has been said, but once again, I think fair competition is actually the key word. We are not against competition, but we have to make sure that this internal market will work after the crisis in a different way than before. So therefore, we propose this new economic and social model for Europe, and I think we agree with almost all the proposals which has been made during our discussion. And once again, I'm really happy and thankful that Nicolas is so committed to the European pillar of social rights. I think if we want to make sure that the workers and the citizens in Europe will still have trust in the European project, then we have to show that this new economic model will be also a social model. And therefore, fair competition, a level playing field is essential. It has been mentioned. One of the main principles for me is the same wage for the same work at the same workplace. This is essential. Therefore, we cannot delay and we cannot postpone the implementation, the national implementation of the new posting of workers directive, for example. But I've heard that the Commission is here at the same opinion. And maybe a last remark, because Iratxe was talking about the conference on the future of Europe, new competences and so on. I think this conference on the future of Europe should keep the promises which have been made to the citizens. And it was the Commission President who said, if necessary, we will not exclude treaty changes. And I think this we should have. We should have an open debate. You know that we have some demands for treaty changes when it comes to competences, but also when it comes to the relationship between economic freedoms in the internal market and fundamental social rights. I think they are not balanced at the moment. We need them at least at the same level. So no priority for economic freedoms over fundamental social rights. This is fundamental. And if we have a look to the recent, sorry to make this reference, but to the recent ruling of the German Constitutional Court, please allow me this remark. Then I have to say, we as workers group and as trade unionists, we were many, many years very unhappy with a lot of rulings of the European Court of Justice when it comes to Laval, to Viking, when workers' rights and collective bargaining rights have been weakened. But we had never the idea not to respect such a ruling. So I think it must be clear that the European Court of Justice, its rulings are binding on all national courts. And if we want to change something, then we have to change the treaty. And we as a workers group and as trade unionists, we will fight for a social progress protocol in order to make fundamental social rights stronger in the internal market.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Actually, that ruling will give us for another seminar, another webinar. But from my side, we're nearing the end of this webinar. I would like just to thank our panelists for the very interesting conversation, a lot of announcements, a lot of content, interesting content. And I hope that we brought some clarity in the middle of this big uncertainty. So thank you all, and maybe Oliver, I don't know if you want to give us a farewell message as well.
Thank you very much to all the panelists and also to all my colleagues from the EESC who made this webinar possible. Thank you very much to all of you. Good luck.
See you next time.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Iratxe, Nicolas.
Bye.